Origins and expansion, 16th–18th century. The British Empire started in the late 1500s. England wanted to explore new lands, find riches, and compete with other European countries like Spain and Portugal. Over time, England became one of the most powerful empires in the world. This growth happened slowly, step by step, over many years. In the 1500s, Europeans began traveling to faraway places. They wanted to discover new lands, trade goods, and become rich and powerful. England also wanted to join this race. Queen Elizabeth I, who ruled England in the late 1500s, supported explorers and sailors. She gave them money and ships to travel across the seas. One important explorer was John Cabot. In 1497, he sailed to North America under the order of King Henry VII. He didn't stay there, but his trip helped England claim land in the New World later. Another famous sailor was Sir Francis Drake. Between 1577 and 1580, he traveled around the world. During his journey, he attacked Spanish ships and brought back gold and silver to England. These victories made England feel stronger. In 1588, England fought against Spain in a big sea battle. The Spanish Armada was a huge fleet of ships sent by Spain to attack England, but England won the battle. This victory made England more confident. After this, England felt ready to explore more and build colonies in faraway lands. To grow its empire, England used special companies called joint stock companies. These companies worked like teams. People gave money to these companies and they shared the profits or losses. Two important companies were the East India Company and the Virginia Company. The East India Company started in 1600. It focused on trading with Asia, especially India. It sold spices, cloth, and other valuable things. Over time, the company became very powerful. It even controlled parts of India. The Virginia Company began in 1606. Its goal was to settle in North America. In 1607, it founded Jamestown, the first successful English colony in America. Life in Jamestown was hard at first because settlers faced hunger, disease, and attacks from indigenous people. But slowly the colony grew and became an important part of the British Empire. During the 1600s and 1700s, England built many colonies in the Americas. These colonies were in two main areas: North America and the Caribbean. In North America, settlers came for different reasons. Some wanted land for farming, others wanted religious freedom, and some just wanted new opportunities. For example, Virginia grew tobacco, which made a lot of money. Massachusetts was settled by Puritans, a religious group looking for a safe place to practice their beliefs. In the Caribbean, England took control of islands like Jamaica and Barbados. These islands were perfect for growing sugar. Sugar plantations made a lot of money, but they relied on enslaved Africans to work. This system was cruel and caused great suffering. Enslaved people were treated badly and forced to work long hours in harsh conditions. As England expanded, it often fought with other European powers. Spain, France, and the Netherlands also wanted colonies and trade routes. England had to fight to protect its interests. For example, the Anglo-Dutch Wars, 1652–1674, were battles between England and the Netherlands over trade. England won some of these wars and gained control of important places. The 7 Years' War, 1756-1763, was another big war. It was between England and France. England won this war and took French lands in Canada and India. These victories helped England become the strongest empire in the world. New inventions and better ships helped England explore and conquer faraway lands. Ships became faster and safer, so sailors could travel long distances without too much danger. Tools like maps and compasses also improved navigation. Trade played a big role in the empire's growth. England set up a system called the triangular trade. Ships carried goods from Europe to Africa, then took enslaved Africans to the Americas, and finally brought raw materials like sugar and cotton back to Europe. This system made a lot of money for England, but it was very unfair to Africans and indigenous people. Religion was another reason why England expanded. Many settlers went to new lands because they wanted to spread Christianity or escape religious problems in Europe. For example, the Pilgrims who arrived on the Mayflower in 1620 wanted to create a community based on their Christian beliefs. Missionaries traveled to Africa, Asia, and the Pacific to convert local people to Christianity. However, these efforts sometimes ignored local traditions and caused problems. By the late 1700s, the British Empire had grown a lot. It started small in the 1500s with explorers and traders. Then it expanded through colonies, trade, and wars. By the end of the 18th century, Britain controlled large parts of North America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. But the empire's growth came at a cost. It depended on slavery, forced labor, and taking land from indigenous people. These actions caused pain and suffering for millions of people. Still, the British Empire kept growing and reached its peak in the 19th century. England's success in building an empire was due to many factors. First, it had strong leaders like Queen Elizabeth I who supported exploration. Second, it used trading companies like the East India Company to make money and expand. Third, it fought wars to take land from other countries. Finally, it used new technology and trade systems to grow richer and more powerful. However, the British Empire's story is not just about success. It is also about the harm it caused. Slavery and colonization hurt millions of people. Enslaved Africans were taken from their homes and forced to work in terrible conditions. Indigenous people lost their lands and were often killed or mistreated. Even though the empire brought wealth to England, it left a painful legacy for many others. By the end of the 18th century, the British Empire was already a major global power. It had colonies in every part of the world. England was proud of its achievements, but it also faced challenges. Colonies in America began to rebel, and people in England started to question whether slavery and colonization were right. These issues would shape the future of the empire in the 19th and 20th centuries. The British Empire's origins and expansion were slow and complicated. It started with small steps like sending explorers and traders. Then it grew through wars, trade, and colonization. By the late 1700s, Britain controlled a vast empire that stretched across continents. This empire changed the world in many ways, both good and bad. Its history reminds us of how nations rise and fall, and how the past shapes the present. The Age of Colonization, 19th century. In the 19th century, the British Empire grew faster than ever before. This was called the Age of Colonization. During this time, Britain became the most powerful empire in the world. It controlled large parts of Africa, Asia, Australia, and the Caribbean. The Industrial Revolution, new technology, and strong armies helped Britain take over more land. But this growth also caused problems for the people who lived in these places. The Industrial Revolution started in Britain in the late 1700s and continued into the 1800s. It changed how things were made. Factories began producing goods quickly and cheaply. Britain needed raw materials like cotton, rubber, and minerals to keep its factories running. It also needed new markets to sell its products. Colonies provided both. They supplied raw materials and bought British goods. This made colonization very important for Britain's economy. Steamships and railroads made travel and trade easier. Steamships could carry goods and people across oceans faster than old sailing ships. Railroads connected distant parts of colonies, making it easier to move goods and control the land. For example, Britain built railroads in India to transport cotton and tea to ports for export. These improvements helped Britain manage its growing empire. Britain also used its strong navy and army to take over new lands. In the 19th century, Britain fought many wars to expand its empire. One famous war was the Opium War with China. Britain wanted to sell opium, a drug, to China. When China tried to stop the trade, Britain went to war and won. After the war, China had to give Hong Kong to Britain and open its ports for trade. This showed how powerful Britain was. Africa was another important region for colonization. In the early 1800s, Britain controlled only a few parts of Africa, like South Africa and some trading posts on the coast. But by the end of the 19th century, Britain had taken over much of the continent. This happened during the scramble for Africa, when European countries competed to claim African land. Britain took control of Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, and other areas. It used these colonies to grow crops, mine gold and diamonds, and build railroads. India was the crown jewel of the British Empire. By the mid-1800s, Britain controlled almost all of India through the East India Company. The company ruled India and collected taxes. It also sent raw materials like cotton, tea, and spices to Britain. In 1857, Indian soldiers, called sepoys, rebelled against British rule. This was called the Sepoy Mutiny. Although the rebellion failed, it showed that Indians were unhappy with British control. After the mutiny, the British government took direct control of India. Queen Victoria became Empress of India in 1876. Australia and New Zealand were also important colonies. In the early 1800s, Britain sent settlers and prisoners to Australia. Over time, cities like Sydney and Melbourne grew. Farmers raised sheep and sold wool to Britain. Gold was discovered in Australia in the 1850s, which brought even more settlers. In New Zealand, British settlers took land from the Maori people. The Maori resisted, but they eventually lost much of their land. The British Empire used different methods to control its colonies. Sometimes it let local leaders stay in power as long as they obeyed British rules. Other times it replaced local governments with British officials. In colonies like India, Britain built schools, roads, and hospitals. These improvements were meant to help Britain, not the local people. For example, schools taught English and British customs so that local people would learn to follow British ways. Slavery was officially ended in the British Empire in the 1830s. However, colonized people were still treated unfairly. Many worked long hours for low pay on plantations, in mines, or building railroads. In Africa, Britain forced villagers to grow cash crops like cotton instead of food. This often led to hunger. In India, famines killed millions of people because Britain took food supplies and sent them to Britain. Missionaries played a big role in colonization. They traveled to colonies to teach Christianity. They built churches and schools. But they also tried to change local cultures. Some missionaries criticized how Britain treated colonized people, but others supported the empire. Missionaries believed they were helping civilize non-European societies, but their actions often caused harm. By the end of the 19th century, the British Empire was at its peak. It controlled about 1/4 of the world's land and people. People said the sun never set on the British Empire because it stretched across so many time zones. Britain was proud of its empire, but not everyone agreed with colonization. Some people in Britain thought it was wrong to take land and resources from others. They began to question whether the empire was fair. Colonized people also resisted British rule. In India, leaders like Mahatma Gandhi started movements to fight for independence. In Africa, groups like the Zulus in South Africa fought battles against British forces. Even though Britain was powerful, it faced challenges in keeping its empire together. The age of colonization changed the world in many ways. Britain became richer and more powerful because of its colonies. Factories in Britain had plenty of raw materials, and colonies bought British goods. Railroads, telegraphs, and steamships connected distant parts of the empire. These changes made communication and trade faster and easier. But colonization also caused suffering. Millions of people lost their land, freedom, and culture. Enslaved Africans, indigenous peoples, and colonized workers were treated badly. Famine and disease spread because of British policies. The effects of colonization are still felt today in many countries. By the late 19th century, the British Empire was the largest empire in history. It included colonies in every part of the world. Britain used its power to control trade, politics, and culture. But this power came at a cost. Colonized people fought back, and some people in Britain began to question whether the empire was right. These tensions would grow in the 20th century and lead to the decline of the British Empire. The story of the British Empire in the 19th century is a story of growth and conflict. It shows how Britain became the most powerful country in the world. It also shows how colonization affected millions of people. The legacy of the British Empire is complex. It includes both achievements and injustices. Understanding this history helps us learn about the world we live in today. World Wars and Decline, early 20th century. In the early 20th century, the British Empire began to weaken. Two big wars called World War I and World War II changed the world and hurt Britain's power. These wars cost a lot of money and lives. They also made people question whether empires were fair or necessary. By the end of World War II, the British Empire was no longer the strongest empire in the world. World War I started in 1914 and ended in 1918. It was a global war that involved many countries, including Britain. Britain fought against Germany and its allies. The war was very expensive. Britain had to borrow money from other countries, especially the United States, to pay for weapons, soldiers, and supplies. Many soldiers from Britain and its colonies also fought in the war. Over 1 million soldiers from India alone joined the British Army. Colonies helped Britain during the war, but this made them want more freedom afterward. The war ended in 1918, but it left Britain weaker. Many people died, and cities were damaged. Soldiers who came back home found it hard to find jobs. Factories had stopped making normal goods because they were busy making weapons. Britain's economy was struggling. At the same time, people in the colonies began to demand independence. They felt that if they could fight for Britain in the war, they should have the right to rule themselves. After World War I, Britain tried to keep control of its empire, but it was difficult. In Ireland, people rebelled against British rule. After years of fighting, Britain finally agreed to let Ireland become independent in 1922. However, Northern Ireland stayed part of the United Kingdom. This showed that Britain could not hold on to all its colonies forever. The Great Depression in the 1930s made things worse. The Great Depression was a time when economies around the world collapsed. People lost their jobs and businesses closed. Britain's colonies were also affected. For example, farmers in India struggled because they could not sell their crops. People in the colonies became even angrier with British rule because they felt Britain cared more about itself than about them. Then came World War II, which started in 1939 and ended in 1945. This war was even bigger and more destructive than World War I. Britain fought against Germany, Japan, and their allies. During the war, Britain's cities were bombed, and many people died. The war cost a lot of money, and Britain had to borrow even more from the United States. By the end of the war, Britain was deeply in debt. Colonies played an important role in World War II. Millions of soldiers from Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean fought for Britain. Factories in India made uniforms and weapons. Farmers in Africa grew food to feed soldiers. But after the war, people in the colonies wanted change. They had risked their lives for Britain, and they felt it was time for independence. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya began organizing movements to demand freedom. After World War II, Britain realized it could not keep its empire the way it used to. It did not have enough money or soldiers to control so many colonies. In 1947, Britain gave independence to India, its most important colony. This was a big moment because India had been the heart of the British Empire for almost 200 years. Pakistan was also created as a separate country for Muslims. Independence did not come easily. There was violence between Hindus and Muslims during the partition of India and Pakistan. Millions of people were forced to leave their homes. Other colonies soon followed. In Africa, countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya gained independence in the 1950s and 1960s. In the Caribbean, islands like Jamaica and Trinidad became independent. Britain slowly gave up control of its colonies, one by one. By the 1970s, most of the British Empire was gone. During this time, Britain also faced challenges at home. Its economy was weak, and it needed help from the United States and other countries. Many factories and buildings had been destroyed during the wars. Britain had to focus on rebuilding its own country instead of managing colonies. People in Britain also started to think differently about the empire. Some believed it was wrong to control other countries. Others thought Britain should focus on helping its own people. The decline of the British Empire did not happen all at once. It took many years. Britain tried to stay connected to its former colonies through an organization called the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth included countries that used to be part of the British Empire. These countries chose to work together, but were independent and equal. Queen Elizabeth II became the head of the Commonwealth, but she did not rule these countries. Even though the British Empire ended, its effects are still seen today. English is spoken in many parts of the world because of colonization. Laws, schools, and governments in former colonies were often based on British systems. Railroads, roads, and other infrastructure built by Britain are still used in some places, but colonization also caused harm. Many indigenous cultures were destroyed, and people were treated unfairly. Famine, poverty, and inequality in some countries can be traced back to colonial policies. The story of the British Empire's decline is a story of change. After 2 world wars, Britain could no longer afford to keep its empire. Colonized people fought for their freedom, and Britain had to let them go. This marked the end of the British Empire, but also the beginning of new nations. These countries had to deal with the challenges left behind by colonization while trying to build their own futures. The British Empire's history teaches us important lessons. It shows how powerful countries can rise and fall. It also shows how colonization affects both the colonizers and the colonized. Understanding this history helps us think about fairness, freedom, and how the world works today. Decolonization and legacy, mid-20th century. After World War II, the British Empire began to break apart. This process was called decolonization. Colonies that had been ruled by Britain started to gain independence. By the mid-20th century, most of the empire was gone. This was a big change because the British Empire had once been the largest and most powerful empire in the world. Decolonization happened for many reasons, and it left a lasting impact on both Britain and its former colonies. One reason for decolonization was that Britain was no longer strong enough to control its colonies. The 2 world wars had cost a lot of money and lives. Britain's economy was weak, and it needed help from other countries like the United States. At the same time, people in the colonies were demanding freedom. They felt they deserved to rule themselves, especially after fighting for Britain in the wars. Leaders in the colonies organized movements to fight for independence. For example, Mahatma Gandhi in India used nonviolent protests to push for freedom. Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya and Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana also led independence movements. India was the first major colony to gain independence in 1947. This was a turning point because India had been the heart of the British Empire. After nearly 200 years of British rule, India finally became free. However, independence came with challenges. Britain divided India into 2 countries, India and Pakistan. This was done because of religious differences between Hindus and Muslims. The division caused violence, and millions of people were forced to leave their homes. Many died during the chaos. Even though independence was celebrated, it was a difficult start for both countries. Other colonies soon followed India's example. In Africa, countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya gained independence in the 1950s and 1960s. Ghana was the first African country to become independent in 1957. Its leader, Kwame Nkrumah, inspired others to fight for freedom. In the Caribbean, islands like Jamaica and Trinidad became independent in the 1960s. Each country had its own struggles during the independence process. For example, Kenya faced a violent conflict called the Mau Mau Uprising before gaining independence in 1963. Despite these challenges, most colonies eventually became free. Decolonization changed the relationship between Britain and its former colonies. Britain created an organization called the Commonwealth to stay connected with these countries. The Commonwealth included nations that used to be part of the British Empire. These countries chose to work together but were independent and equal. Queen Elizabeth II became the head of the Commonwealth, but she did not rule these countries. The Commonwealth focused on cooperation in areas like trade, education, and sports. For example, the Commonwealth Games are held every 4 years and bring together athletes from member countries. Even though the British Empire ended, its legacy is still seen today. One major impact of colonization was language. English became a global language because of the British Empire. It is now spoken in many countries around the world, including India, Nigeria, and Australia. English is also used as a common language for international business and communication. Schools in former colonies often teach in English, which has helped keep the language alive. Colonization also influenced laws, governments, and education systems in former colonies. Many countries adopted British-style legal systems, with courts and laws based on British traditions. Parliaments and elections in some former colonies were modeled after Britain's government. Schools in the colonies often taught British history and culture. While this helped spread education, it sometimes ignored local traditions and knowledge. Railroads, roads, and other infrastructure built by Britain are still used in some places. For example, the railroads in India were built during British rule and are still important for transportation today. However, not all of Britain's actions were helpful. Many of these projects were meant to benefit Britain, not the local people. For instance, cash crops like cotton and tea were grown in colonies to make money for Britain. This often left little land for growing food, which caused hunger in some areas. Colonization also caused harm that is still felt today. Indigenous cultures were often destroyed or ignored. Local languages, religions, and traditions were sometimes replaced with British ones. Enslaved Africans and colonized workers were treated badly. They were forced to work long hours for low pay or no pay at all. In some cases, people were displaced from their homes to make room for plantations or mines. These injustices created problems like poverty and inequality that still exist in some countries. The partition of India and Pakistan is one example of how colonization caused long-term problems. The division was rushed and poorly planned, leading to violence and suffering. Even today, India and Pakistan have tense relations because of their shared history. Similar issues can be seen in other parts of the world where borders were drawn by colonial powers without considering local cultures or communities. Despite these challenges, decolonization also brought hope and new opportunities. Former colonies could now make their own decisions and build their own futures. Leaders worked to create new governments, schools, and economies. Some countries struggled at first, while others found success. For example, Singapore became a wealthy and modern nation after gaining independence. Other countries like Nigeria and Kenya faced difficulties but continued to grow over time. The story of decolonization shows how empires can rise and fall. It also shows how colonization affects both the colonizers and the colonized. Britain lost its empire but learned to adapt to a changing world. Its former colonies had to deal with the challenges left behind by colonization while trying to build better futures. This process was not easy, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter in history. Today, we can see both the good and bad effects of the British Empire. On one hand, it spread English, built infrastructure, and influenced laws and education systems. On the other hand, it caused harm by exploiting resources, enslaving people, and ignoring local cultures. Understanding this history helps us think about fairness, equality, and how countries can work together in the future. Cultural and global impact, modern era. The British Empire left a big mark on the world. Even though it ended in the 20th century, its effects are still seen today. The empire changed cultures, languages, and how countries work together. It also shaped the way people think about history, fairness, and power. While some of these changes were good, others caused problems that still affect the world. One of the biggest impacts of the British Empire is language. English became a global language because of colonization. Today, millions of people around the world speak English. It is used in business, science, travel, and the Internet. Countries like India, Nigeria, and Australia still use English as an official language. Schools in many places teach English because it helps people communicate with others around the world. This has made English one of the most important languages in the world. The British Empire also spread its laws and government systems to its colonies. Many former colonies adopted British-style legal systems. These systems include courts, judges, and laws based on British traditions. For example, countries like India and Kenya still use some British laws today. Parliaments and elections in former colonies were often modeled after Britain's government. This helped spread democracy to many parts of the world. However, not all countries kept these systems. Some changed them to fit their own cultures and needs. Education was another area influenced by the British Empire. Schools in colonies often taught British history, literature, and values. Subjects like math and science were also taught in English. This helped spread education to many places, but it sometimes ignored local knowledge and traditions. In some cases, children were punished for speaking their native languages at school. This made it harder for local cultures to survive. Today, many countries are working to bring back their own languages and traditions in schools. Railroads, roads, and other infrastructure built by Britain are still used in many places. For example, the railroads in India were built during colonial times and are still important for transportation today. Roads and bridges in Africa and Asia also came from British projects. These improvements helped connect people and make trade easier. But they were often built to benefit Britain, not the local people. For instance, cash crops like cotton and tea were grown in colonies to make money for Britain. This left little land for growing food, which caused hunger in some areas. The British Empire also had a big impact on culture. Music, sports, and art were shared between Britain and its colonies. Cricket, a sport that started in England, became very popular in India, Australia, and the Caribbean. People in these countries still play and watch cricket today. Football soccer also spread through the empire and became a global sport. The Commonwealth Games, held every 4 years, bring together athletes from former colonies. These events show how the empire's legacy lives on in sports and entertainment. Religion was another area influenced by the empire. Missionaries traveled to colonies to teach Christianity. They built churches and schools, but they also tried to change local cultures. Some missionaries criticized how Britain treated colonized people, but others supported the empire. Over time, Christianity spread to many parts of Africa and Asia. Today, it is one of the major religions in these regions. However, this also meant that some local religions and traditions were lost or weakened. While the British Empire brought some benefits, it also caused harm. Colonization exploited resources and people. Enslaved Africans and colonized workers were treated badly. They were forced to work long hours for low pay or no pay at all. In some cases, people were displaced from their homes to make room for plantations or mines. These injustices created problems like poverty and inequality that still exist in some countries. Famine and disease were also common during colonial times. For example, famines in India killed millions of people because Britain took food supplies and sent them to Britain. Local farmers were forced to grow cash crops instead of food, which made hunger worse. Diseases like smallpox spread quickly because of poor living conditions. These problems left a lasting impact on the health and economies of former colonies. Colonial borders also caused long-term problems. Britain drew lines on maps to divide land among colonies. These borders often ignored local cultures, languages, and communities. When colonies became independent, these borders stayed. This led to conflicts between groups that had been forced to live together. For example, the partition of India and Pakistan caused violence and suffering. Even today, some countries struggle with tensions caused by colonial borders. Despite these challenges, the end of the British Empire marked the beginning of new opportunities. Former colonies could now make their own decisions and build their own futures. Leaders worked to create new governments, schools, and economies. Some countries struggled at first, while others found success. For example, Singapore became a wealthy and modern nation after gaining independence. Other countries like Nigeria and Kenya faced difficulties but continued to grow over time. Today, we can see both the good and bad effects of the British Empire. On one hand, it spread English, built infrastructure, and influenced laws and education systems. On the other hand, it caused harm by exploiting resources, enslaving people, and ignoring local cultures. Understanding this history helps us think about fairness, equality, and how countries can work together in the future. The British Empire's legacy is complex. It includes achievements like spreading education and democracy, but it also includes injustices like slavery and exploitation. By learning about this history, we can better understand the world we live in today. We can also work to address the problems left behind by colonization and build a fairer future for everyone. That brings us to the end of our journey through the history of the British Empire. From its beginnings in the 16th century to its decline in the 20th century, the empire shaped the world in many ways, some good, some bad, and some still debated today. We've seen how exploration, trade, and colonization helped Britain grow into the largest empire the world had ever known. We've also learned about the struggles and sacrifices of the people who lived under British rule. The empire brought new connections between cultures, languages, and ideas, but it also caused pain, inequality, and loss for millions. Today, the legacy of the British Empire is all around us. English is spoken worldwide. Laws and governments were influenced by British systems, and sports like cricket bring people together. But we also see the scars of colonization, poverty, divided communities, and cultural losses that remind us of the challenges left behind. Understanding this history helps us think about fairness, equality, and how countries can work together. It teaches us that while empires rise and fall, their impact lasts for generations. By learning from the past, we can build a better future for everyone. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the story of the British Empire. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more history lessons. Until next time, keep exploring the stories that shape our world. Goodbye.